Today, we're diving into something pretty wild. We're going to use a framework from nearly a century ago to try and make sense of a very modern problem. We're talking about Leon Trotsky. Yeah, that Trotsky, and his blueprint for how authoritarianism takes root. I know, it sounds a little out there, right? A Russian revolutionary explaining modern American politics? But stick with me. The question we're asking is, seriously, could an essay from all the way back in 1932 actually give us a checklist for what we're seeing in the US today? It's a bold claim, so let's dig in. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at our so-called unlikely prophet and his essay. Then we get to the real meat of it, his authoritarianism checklist. We'll apply it to the US, see what fits, what doesn't, and then figure out what we can learn from all this. All right, first up, our unlikely prophet. We're talking about Leon Trotsky and his 1932 essay, Fascism, What It Is and How to Fight It. Now, it's definitely not a beach read, but the core idea in it, whoa, it's incredibly powerful, and as you'll see, surprisingly relevant. Here's the big takeaway from Trotsky. He argued that authoritarianism doesn't just happen. It's not some random lightning strike. Nope. He saw it as something that has to grow, like a plant. It needs just the right soil, just the right conditions to take root. And that idea, that's the key to everything we're about to talk about. Okay, so now for the main event. Let's get into Trotsky's checklist. We're going to go through his conditions one by one and see how they stack up against what's been happening in the United States. First up on the list, a major economic crisis. Trotsky's point was that authoritarian movements find their fuel in a middle class that's been squeezed, that feels like it's been totally abandoned. You know, when your financial security just vanishes, you get desperate, and desperate people start looking for radical solutions. So, does this fit the US? Well, kinda. The source points to decades of wages going nowhere, and then bam, the 2008 crash. That absolutely created that feeling of economic insecurity Trotsky was talking about. But, and this is a huge but, the US economy never completely cratered like, say, Weimar Germany's did. It was bad, for sure, but the country was still a superpower. The crisis wasn't an existential threat to the whole system. Okay, condition number 2, political paralysis. This is all about what happens when people completely lose faith in the system. They look at politics and all they see is gridlock, corruption, this feeling that the whole thing is rigged. And when that happens, they start looking for someone, anyone, from outside the establishment to come in and just break it all. And wow, this chart just says it all, doesn't it? Look at that line go down. This shows the trust people have in government just plummeting over the years. This is the exact political vacuum Trotsky was warning us about, playing out in real time. And what fills that vacuum? Rhetoric like this. When you hear things like, drain the swamp, or the system is corrupt, only I can fix it, that's not just talk. It's a direct shot at that loss of faith we just saw on the chart. It's the classic playbook Trotsky laid out. Position yourself as the only one who can save a broken system. All right, on to condition number 3. This is a big one. It's not enough to have a leader. You need a mass movement. Trotsky said these things are powered by a really fired-up base, a group of people driven by resentment, cultural anxieties, and this really powerful promise to bring back some kind of lost greatness. And I mean, the parallel here is pretty obvious, right? A slogan like, Make America Great Again, taps directly into that nostalgia, that feeling that something was lost. It's a perfect fit for Trotsky's description. But once again, there's a major difference. The source is clear. Historic fascist movements had massive, organized paramilitary forces. Think of the brown shirts. In the US case, what we've seen is much more sporadic and on a way smaller scale. Checklist item number 4. You know the old saying, follow the money. Trotsky argued that these movements can't get to the finish line without some serious backing from the business elite. The idea is that some powerful people start to fear social unrest more than they fear an authoritarian, and they decide to place their bets. So how does this one line up? Well, it's another partial match. The source suggests that big business kind of flirted with the idea. Some industries definitely threw a lot of money behind Trump. But corporate America as a whole, they never really went all in. And especially after January 6th, you saw a lot of big names creating distance. So no unified front there. And that brings us to the final condition, the end game. This is where the movement stops trying to win within the democratic system and starts trying to overturn it. It's a direct attack on the institutions themselves. And yeah, the source doesn't pull any punches here. January 6th is presented as a textbook example of this final step. It was a clear attempt to use a mass movement to physically stop the certification of an election, a direct parallel. But, and this is probably the most important but in this whole explainer, this is where the model breaks down. Because the institutions held. The courts threw out the claims. State officials did their jobs and certified the results. The military stayed out of it. The system was pushed to its limit. It definitely bent, but it didn't break. The transition of power happened. Okay, so we've been through the whole checklist. What's the final score? Did Trotsky actually predict Trump almost a century ago? Let's pull it all together. This really lays it out. On one hand, Trotsky's framework is brilliant at explaining the why, the emotional core of the movement. It nails the economic anxiety, the loss of faith in institutions. But on the other hand, the comparison falls apart when you look at the facts on the ground. The U.S. economy didn't fully collapse, the institutions held up under pressure, there was no huge paramilitary army, and big business never fully signed up. So if it wasn't a perfect match, what's the point? What's the lesson here? What can this old essay actually teach us about defending democracy today? And this is where it gets really interesting. According to the source, Trotsky's big lesson isn't just to get angry or to call out what's happening. He'd say that moral outrage, on its own, just isn't enough to stop these trends. So what is enough? He argued the only real defense is to attack the problem at its roots. You have to fix the actual conditions that made people vulnerable in the first place. That means rebuilding economic security for regular people. It means giving them a real reason to believe in democracy again, a genuine stake in the system. And the source wraps it up with this fantastic quote. The core message here, that you have to address people's real-world problems and their feeling of being left out, that's not a left-wing or a right-wing idea. It's just good advice. So I'll leave you with this final thought. If instability is the fertile ground for authoritarianism, then what's the bedrock of a healthy democracy? Is it ultimately about building a society where people feel secure, where there's shared prosperity, and where everyone feels like they have a real shot? Is that the ultimate defense? It's something to chew on. Thanks for joining me.